Human behavior is a labyrinth of contradictions, particularly when it comes to navigating power dynamics and exploitation. From toxic relationships to systemic oppression, individuals often find themselves trapped in cycles where dominance and submission intertwine, raising questions about agency, morality, and psychological survival. Philosophers and psychologists have long dissected these patterns, probing whether such behaviors reflect innate human nature, adaptive strategies, or societal constructs. This article explores the interplay of power, exploitation, and psychological coping mechanisms, examining how society and professionals frame these complex dynamics. Psychological mechanisms, survival in the shadow of power. At the heart of exploitative relationships lies trauma bonding, a phenomenon where victims form emotional attachments to their abusers. Psychologists attribute this to intermittent reinforcement, cycles of abuse followed by fleeting kindness, that create a dependency akin to addiction. Similarly, cognitive dissonance compels individuals to rationalize harmful situations. They hurt me because they care, to reduce the mental strain of conflicting realities. Another critical concept is learned helplessness, where prolonged exposure to uncontrollable adversity leads to passive acceptance of harm. This mirrors behaviors in systemic oppression, where marginalized groups internalize their subjugation as inevitable. Such coping mechanisms are not inherently pathological, but rather survival strategies forged in oppressive environments. Philosophical perspectives. Power as a human condition. Philosophers have long grappled with the ethics of power and exploitation. Friedrich Nietzsche argued that the will to power drives human behavior, framing dominance and submission as natural expressions of life. In Beyond Good and Evil, he critiques moral frameworks that label exploitation as evil, suggesting such judgments stem from societal constructs rather than inherent truths. Michel Foucault viewed power as a diffuse, omnipresent force embedded in societal structures. In Discipline and Punish, he posits that individuals internalize oppressive systems, patriarchy, capitalism, until they willingly police themselves and others, perpetuating cycles of control. Erich Fromm, in Escape from Freedom, theorized that authoritarianism arises from a fear of autonomy. People may submit to, or seek to dominate, others to escape the anxiety of self-determination, a dynamic evident in abusive relationships and fascist regimes alike. Simone de Beauvoir highlighted the paradox of complicity in oppression. In The Second Sex, she argues that societal conditioning often leads the oppressed to rationalize their subjugation, blurring the line between victim and collaborator. These thinkers collectively suggest that exploitation is not merely a moral failing but a complex interplay of human drives, societal conditioning, and existential anxiety. Societal and professional views. Pathology or adaptation. The question of whether exploitative behaviors are classified as mental illness or normal human behavior is contentious. Mental illness framing. Certain patterns, like Stockholm Syndrome, officially termed trauma bonding in some contexts, are recognized in psychology as dissociative responses to captivity or abuse. The DSM-5 categorizes related behaviors under adjustment disorders, or post-traumatic stress, when they cause significant distress or dysfunction. However, most professionals avoid labeling participation in exploitative dynamics as illness, unless it meets strict diagnostic criteria. Pathologizing such behaviors risks blaming victims, why don't they leave, rather than addressing systemic roots. Maladaptive behavior. Many psychologists frame exploitation as maladaptive coping strategies rather than mental illness. For example, bystander apathy, normalized indifference to others' suffering as seen in corporate environments or abusive households. Identification with the aggressor, mimicking an abuser's behavior to regain agency, common in bullying or intergenerational trauma. These behaviors are often socially reinforced. Capitalism, for instance, rewards transactional relationships where using others for gain is normalized. Societal complicity. Systems of oppression thrive when exploitation is culturally sanctioned. Philosopher Hannah Arendt's concept of the banality of evil illustrates how ordinary people perpetuate harm through conformity and indifference. Similarly, Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments revealed how authority figures can compel individuals to act against their morals. Society often condemns overt abuse while tacitly accepting subtler forms, wage exploitation, emotional manipulation. The line between survival and pathology. The distinction between adaptive and harmful behavior hinges on context. Agency. Does the individual have realistic alternatives to exploitation? A person staying in an abusive marriage due to financial dependence is surviving, not choosing abuse. Harm. When does survival strategy become self-destruction? Chronic self-sacrifice or aggression may erode mental health over time. Systemic factors. Poverty, sexism, and racism create environments where exploitation is incentivized. A homeless person trading dignity for shelter isn't mentally ill, they're navigating systemic failure. Conclusion. Toward awareness and empathy. Exploitative behaviors reflect humanity's capacity to adapt, even normalize, oppression to survive. Philosophers and psychologists urge us to view these patterns not as individual pathologies but as symptoms of broader societal dysfunction. While professionals debate classifications, the real work lies in dismantling systems that force people into roles of user or used. As Foucault reminds us, power is not a fixed hierarchy but a web we can reweave through collective awareness and resistance. By fostering empathy and equity, we might yet dream of a world where survival no longer demands complicity in our own exploitation.